program today. Of course, your company is appreciated from week to week. Today we will be having a discussion on street vending. Street vending, especially within the area of Basseterre. Street vendors are an integral part of urban economies around the world. It doesn't matter where, whether it is Santo Domingo, in the Dominican Republic, Kingston in Jamaica, Paris in France, London in England, Barcelona in Spain, Taipei in Taiwan, or right here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Street vendors are an integral part. They offer easy access to a wide range of goods and services in public places, spaces. They sell everything from fresh vegetables to prepared foods, from building materials to garments and crafts, from consumer electronics to auto repairs to haircuts. Street vendors add to socioeconomic life by being part of the informal economy. Street vendors strengthen their communities. Most street vendors provide the main source of income for their households, bring food to their families, and paying school fees for their children. These informal workers have strong links to the formal economy. Street vendors create jobs, not only for themselves, but transport operators, porters, etc. And many generate revenue for the country through the payment for licenses and permits, fees and fines, and other types of taxes. They add vibrancy to city life, and in many places are considered a cornerstone of historical and cultural heritage. Many enter street vending because they cannot find a job in the formal economy. They are extremely vulnerable to exogenous shocks, economic downturns, such as the present COVID-19 pandemic. And the majority of them, the majority of street vendors, are women. However, there are challenges with respect to street vending. Today, we are here to look at some of these challenges and to debate issues, recommendations, public policy, and solutions with respect to this very important economic grouping within the society, especially in relation to safety, to health, and the rule of law. Today, I have on the panel to discuss this very important issue of street vending, Superintendent Cromwell Henry of the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force. Welcome, Mr. Henry. I have Mr. Philip Brown, Director of the Small Business Development Center within the Ministry of Trade. Mr. Brown, welcome. And then I have Mr. Austin J. Farrier, who is Chair of the Interministerial Committee to deal with street vending in Basseterre. Mr. Farrier, welcome. An interministerial committee to deal with the issue of street vending was in Basseterre was formed. Mr. Farrier, you are the chair of that committee. Why was the committee formed? What are its objectives? What are the issues and recommendations coming out of that committee?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. The committee was formed because there were some concerns about the safety and the health of the citizens, not citizens, but the pedestrians, especially in Bastille, because of what was happening. It was unorganized. There was a lot of chaos when you had persons who were not only setting up where they feel like, but also not asking any questions. So let me paint a picture of Bastille. In Bastille, there are formal traders, there are authorized street vendors, and there are also unauthorized street vendors. We are now modernizing as a country, so we are putting in lights that controls persons driving on the road. And what was felt that if something wasn't done, that modernization in terms of the traffic lights and the chaos that's happening on the sidewalks would end in someone being gravely hurt. And so the cabinet decided to put a committee together to make recommendations, basically. And they gave me some principles to follow. One of the principles were everyone has the right to make an honest living. That's one. The other one is that we had to protect micro entities. They were the most vulnerable of the businesses. Another one is if we have to relocate persons, what are the details to make these areas enjoyable for both the users and the customers coming there? And the last one is, are there any legislative changes needed to be put in place to ensure that what happens in Bastille right now doesn't happen again? And so the committee consisted of persons from various ministries. We had the police on the committee, and they were concerned about safety. They didn't compromise when it came to safety. We had the Ministry of Health. Those guys didn't compromise when it came to the public health. We had the Vice President of the Chamber. She came and she's there to protect businesses, big business, small business, the micro entities. We had a representative from tourism, their experience in dealing with vendors. We had a representative from the Development Control and Planning Board. My skill set, I'm the chairman, but my skill set is in areas where vending can happen. We had a representative from Legal and Justice, and so that person came to protect the rights of the citizens. So citizens have rights, and so we wanted not to trample on those rights. And we had a representative from Inland Revenue and Finance, because at the end of the day, if you said something about the informal sector, we on the government side would love to make the transition from the informal sector to the formal sector as smooth as possible for persons who want to come over there. Because not all vendors are from the informal sector. There's some on the streets that are somewhat formalized. They are authorized to be there. And so the person from Inland Revenue gave us ideas in terms of the business, the Occupations and Licenses of Business Act, that act that deals with businesses. And so that interministerial committee, basically, they stood their positions, and we came up with some good issues and recommendations, basically. You want me to go into that? One of the main issues coming out of from the traffic department, from the police, is the issue of safety. The competition on the roads right now is causing pedestrians to be at risk. It's going to come a time where we can't walk into the road because you might risk being run over. And one person getting knocked down is one too many. What I'm most worried about, and what the committee is most worried about, is people with disabilities. The sidewalks are already crowded, even when the vendors are not there. Imagine being in a wheelchair, having to be in the road, because some of the sidewalks might be too small to accommodate. That's an issue we have to deal with. Another issue is public health. it's not easy being an entrepreneur. And when you have someone looking on and trying to emulate authorized vendors on the street and just get up one morning and decide, I want to do that, but don't know the processes, then ask a question. Because if you were going to seek authorization, you would be directed to civil servants, and they would give you the necessary support and tools needed to know how to do whatever you wanted to do. But instead, you just went and did something like that. Those persons don't know who they are negatively impacting. And so that became an issue where pedestrians and the persons with disabilities were going to be entangled into a safety issue, and we're going to be entangled into a health issue, especially pedestrians who like to buy food on the street. There are people on the street that know how to cook, know how to handle food, and then there are others on the street that don't, because they didn't ask a question. They just figured they're going to copy, and that could have been a problem. And so the committee felt that this needed to be handled in a way that if you're going to do something, ask a question, seek authorization. Ministry of Health is there to guide you on the way to handle food. They have courses, and therefore the public's health won't be compromised. There's an issue of waste management. Persons who know how to handle food know how to manage the waste after, know how to clean up after themselves, know how to clean the area before. Those who really didn't ask a question, didn't know anything, they tend to leave the area in a mess. And this has implications going forward to the health of Bastille, the cleanliness of Bastille. So a lot of what we are dealing with is basically making sure people are safe. I'm trying, basically, my skill set on the committee is trying to decentralize a lot of the activities and create areas where people can actually play their trade honestly and grow because of it. So it's not just a normal area. We're not doing things like other countries have done, and some have failed, some have succeeded at it. We want to create areas, I think they call them incubator areas. We want to create areas where people can come, grow, formalize themselves, maybe get a brick and mortar store, and then the next person comes in, formalizes themselves, grows, lives up to their full potential, and then it's like a revolving door.
Mr. Farrell, there is an accusation out there, something going around in social media, that this is being done because the government is uncaring, that the government does not really care about the small businessman, and that their emphasis is rather on the big businesses of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce and that sort of a thing. Also that, by doing all of this, you're taking food out of the poor man's mouth, you're taking food from the table of his family, and accusations of that nature. How would you respond to that?
I don't actually see it that way. Because remember, I am chairing a committee where there are persons on the committee trying to protect business, and the smallest business of them is the micro-entities. I see this as a battle between the informal sector and the formal sector. There are persons in the informal sector that know how to navigate the informal sector and know eventually that in order to live up to their full potential, they might have to formalize themselves. And the government has a lot of help. The government is going to offer a lot of support on that end. There's some people out there right now that are in survival mode because of COVID, and they're new to the informal sector. And so they basically don't understand the rules. There are rules in both sectors, There are rules in the formal sector and there are rules in the informal sector. And if you don't know the rules in the informal sector, you're basically not going to be able to navigate it properly. All we are asking on the committee is that if you want to do anything, seek help. Ask for help, basically. There's more than enough support. Mr. Brown is here on the panel to tell you about that support. I can direct you to persons that can support you. Any civil servant, know who is there to support you. It only comes if you seek authorization, seek certification, ask a question, seek help. Because technically we want to, the thing is we were trained to view persons on the streets as budding entrepreneurs. And we were trained to basically offer the necessary support for them to develop their business. But if they're going to develop their business, we want them to develop it in a safe, healthy, and lawful way. That's what we were trained to do. So when we see people trying to make a living, if you have to break the law in order for you to make a living, that's not sustainable. There's a better way. There is a better way. If you have to endanger yourself and your patrons in order for you to make a living, come talk to me, because I know there's a better way than that.
Mr. Farrier, thank you. I think one of the issues is that this practice has been so ingrained in the Bastia area for such a long period of time that people just think that it is the norm. Mr. Brown, with respect to working conditions, occupational health and safety, things like that, business support, street vendors face many challenges. They're a part of the informal sector. What type of big business support is there for street vendors? Is there a small business association? Is there a street vendors association? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Lesroy, for that question. And before I go directly to the answer, I'd want to thank the committee, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this particular panel, because as I would have listened to your opening remarks, Mr. Williams, and listening to Mr. Farrier coming right after, I think we have found some common ground. We are in agreement that these budding entrepreneurs, these vendors, these small business people, micro business people, are critically important to our society. We will have agreed that the means by which they function, the environments, etc., can also be challenging and detrimental to some of our more vulnerable persons as well. So here we have an extremely important sector, but there are some challenges, there are some issues which we must address. Both seem to be equally important. Now, you would have alluded to the acquisition, and I don't know. My feedback, I think I'm constantly in touch and engaged, because the government would have, may I say, enlisted me in this activity from the standpoint of this panel, because at the Small Business Development Center, we interact with these entrepreneurs, these micro and small business persons, and so the government would have been trying to ensure that its major business support arm is involved and engaged to provide the support as necessary. So I want to believe that over the last couple of days, my interaction with a number of these persons may not necessarily have been that they disagree with the move. It seems to me, and it's debatable, I don't know of any perfect person, that it's more of a timing issue, maybe a communication issue, and the fact that the uncertainty, now, it's change. And, we would have heard over the years that change is a challenge. It's normally not something that people gravitate to immediately. As a matter of fact, I mean, a challenge is an opportunity, but it's simply dressed in working clothes. And so for us to embrace the challenge so that we can make use of the opportunity, sometimes you have to look a little deeper. You asked about an association, and you really brought me to the point where that might have been my parting shot. Because I know that we did mention there's some representation for businesses on the committee, which Mr. Farrier heads. But the whole issue with that is that I know that a lot of the micro enterprises may not necessarily feel that they're represented in these other bodies that we spoke to. And so I would always encourage, and interestingly, what is being presented now, because as Mr. Farrier said, what obtained, it wasn't sustainable, just wasn't sustainable. And so this is not a move that should be seen in a negative. But actually, this is an upgrade. This is an opportunity to make changes, to make important changes. And so what I'm seeing is our department, our division, our ministry getting involved here in helping some of these vendors to grasp this opportunity. Of course, the support we provide. Some of them may need to be engaged in some business development activities, some planning. They may need to be involved in some more marketing. They may need to be seeking financing to adapt to the environment which they're now being placed in. They certainly may want to have a look at strategies when it comes to business continuity, because COVID would have taught us some things as well. A lot of our small business persons, the persons in the micro, medium and small and medium sector, may not necessarily have gotten involved in things like insurance, even social security, self-employed coverage. But I think we would have seen how important that is. Those are business continuity strategies that you could start again. You have something, you have a leg to stand on when there is a disaster, when there is something that you need to mitigate. And so I'm thinking that while we are looking, and some of us, some persons who I think are in the minority, may be thinking, well, you're taking bread out of my mouth and you're moving me off. We talk of location. But in truth and in fact, what is being proposed and placing persons in an area dedicated, we refer to them as clusters. And I could say a little more on that later. But placing persons in that area can be a win-win. It can be serious benefit because, and if I were to just make my last comment and break here for a while, maybe we need to look at the international community and see how businesses feed off each other. Let's look at the most famous franchises in the world. Those of us who have traveled, whenever we travel, your son wants some KFC, but your daughter wants McDonald's. And guess what? McDonald's is just across the road from KFC. But your nephew wants Wendy's, and Wendy's is just across the road there. And so, while they may seem to be in competition, they complement each other. And it results in a win-win. More income for you, more sales for you. But I'll stay there for now and come back with some of the other benefits and some of the things we can look at a little later.
Right. I'm going to come to Superintendent Henry, but I want to ask Mr. Farrier, the Interministerial Committee to deal with the issue of street vending. Since there is no Small Business Association and there is no Vendors Association, who represented the vendors on that committee? because they should have been able to would have given some input in terms of their own well-being, street vending, their relocation. How was the interministerial committee comprised?
Technically, I did miss out two important facets of that committee. The cabinet wanted to have at least one local vendor and one vendor from overseas on the committee. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten any vendor to attend any committee meeting so far. The meetings are not over. Hopefully we'll soon get somebody there, but the problem with that is most of the vendors on the streets are in competition with each other, and no one vendor seems to be able to speak for all vendors. So I am hoping that one of these days they have a vendors association. Unfortunately, as you said before, most of these vendors are in the informal sector, and so they don't seem to be organized enough to come together and have one voice. I would love to hear from them. So what we are doing now is treating the vendors individually, as individuals. As we said before, we look at them as entrepreneurs and having one-on-one, because each vendor has their own journey. No two vendors are alike. So they talk to us about their struggles, what they want to see happening. The committee came up with an idea that needs to be fleshed out even more properly. Instead of having vendors in a room, we wanted to develop like a sort of forum where people can come and speak. But what has to be acknowledged is that street vendors are not the only stakeholders in Bastille right now. You have street vendors, you have authorized street vendors, unauthorized street vendors, drivers, especially people driving up 4th Street. You have pedestrians, the elderly, persons with disabilities, formal traders. You get those persons in a room, and you hear ideas from those persons, and you come up with solutions, because those are the true stakeholders, especially in Bastille. So that's what the committee is working on, and we have to work on the support needed. We have to find a forum for them. But that is where now we start to get the information that's going to help us get vending basically under control.
Thank you, Mr. Farrier. Superintendent Henry, it was mentioned that, of course, the rule of law is important when setting up a business, because you just don't want to have street vending, but it must be done in accordance with the laws of the country. Now, what are some of the safety and security issues within the public space that street vending in Bastille causes? And secondly, how does a street vendor go about getting authorization to set up his or her business? We heard Mr. Farrier saying that one of the issues is that people set up these street vending businesses without authorization. Mind you, the COVID-19 pandemic has created more cooks and people selling food and so on. People have to survive. So what is the process, and what are some of the safety and security issues?
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and again, pleasant good afternoon to the listeners. Let me first be clear that I am all for street vendors and street vending. My grandmother was a street vendor. My mother is a street vendor. And so I have absolutely nothing against street vendors and street vending. We have to respect the right of these persons to earn a living, their individual right to work. That is their job. That is how they earn an income. And so they have a right to do that. But at the same time, the public has a collective right to access and to use public spaces, sidewalks, readily comes to mind as one of such public space that the public has a right to. So how do we balance the individual right to earn a living or to work with the public's collective right to use public space? This is where government comes in, the authorities. The government has a responsibility to regulate the use of public spaces and to protect the collective right of the public to utilize or to use these spaces. And so several pieces of legislation would have been put in place to protect such rights. One that readily comes to mind is legislation against causing obstruction to walkways and to sidewalks. And this can be found in the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act. Traffic includes pedestrians. And so the sidewalks were designed for pedestrian use, so that anything that impedes the flow of traffic, pedestrian traffic in this case, is an obstruction. And so the authorities has a responsibility, has a duty to prevent any obstruction to these sidewalks. And we all see the type of obstruction that pedestrian, that vendors cause on the sidewalks. The vendors may take up half the sidewalk to display their wares, and their customers take up the other half of the sidewalk while they are purchasing or just looking at what the vendors are offering. And so the pedestrians who are not participating in that activity, they're now forced to go around and to walk in the street. And as Mr. Farrier would have indicated, with the street lights, the traffic signal that are to come on stream shortly, they would require a free flow of traffic. That is why we are removing a lot of the parking or all of the parking from the streets where these lights are, because they would require to have a free flow of traffic, so that once there's a green light, we expect that traffic would flow without obstruction. And we cannot have pedestrians stepping out into the road or even walking into the road to avoid vendors on the sidewalk. Those pedestrians will be placed at risk. You indicated the persons who are disabled, Mr. Farrier. These persons, they will be forced to move into the street because the sidewalk, they are already small and now they're obstructed. These people will be forced to move to the street, and they would be at greater risk of coming into contact with these vehicles. And so as public servants, we have a right, we have a responsibility to ensure that while we protect the individual right to work, we also have to protect the public's collective right to access public space. And so that is where this committee that Mr. Farrier would have spoken of comes in, where that committee is now charged with the responsibility of coming up with alternative spaces. And you would see the composition of the committee. It includes the police, it includes health, it includes business. And so that committee would come up with alternative space where the individual vendors can exercise their right to work, and the public, the pedestrians, can exercise their right to use public spaces freely without obstruction.
Right. I mean, Mr. Farrier, you spoke about authorization. Now, sometimes vendors may not know the legal procedure or the process to go about getting authorized as a vendor. And yes, you mentioned we want to have vending, street vending, but we have to do it in a legal way. Now, what are some of the key pieces of legislation that speak to street vending?
Well, at least 3 come to mind. There is the Street and Sidewalks Prohibition Act that deals with actual types of vending on the streets. He also speaks to seeking authorization if you're going to sell certain things on the street. So you have to go to the Ministry of Finance for that. There is the Tourism Authority Licenses of Vendors Act, but that deals with specific areas around the country in which the Tourism Authority governs vendors. And so vending only happens in those areas. They don't happen outside of those areas, and there's a governance structure for those areas. There's the Licenses on Business and Occupations Act that deals with vendors who want to be formalized. You have more protection from the government and a lot more support when you're formalized. And then you deal with then there's the Public Health Act, which is a very, very powerful act. It deals with how vendors handle food. And that is a serious issue where it's not any person can handle food. It's very, very, well, when you look at it, the health department, besides the food handlers permit, there's also a health permit where the health department has to approve the area that you are selling food to make sure that it's actually very clean. So those are the pieces of legislation that comes to mind that deals with actual vending itself.
Superintendent, from your end, you would look at the traffic laws or the Traffic Act, the Traffic Act, Vehicles and Road Traffic Act.
Right, but in addition to the Traffic Act, the police has a responsibility to enforce all laws. So where any law prohibits an activity, the police has the responsibility to ensure that that law is not violated. So the laws that you would have mentioned, the Street and Sidewalk Prohibition Act, the Licensing Vending Act, all those acts, wherever there are violations by anyone, the police has a responsibility to enforce.
Now, in recent times, you would have put out some notices. Those notices would have come from the traffic department. What are some of those notices?
Well, those were specific to vehicles, those vehicles that are used as food trucks on the streets around the square. Those vehicles do not meet the basic requirements that motor vehicles are required to have when using public spaces. A vehicle is required to be insured. Once you're using a public road, it is required to be licensed, which means that it must meet certain standard in order to be licensed. These vehicles do not meet that standard, those standards, and they are using the public space. And so the traffic department, the police, has a responsibility to ensure that vehicles that are used in public spaces meet certain standards, and these vehicles do not meet that standard.
Right. Now, the Public Works Department would have also put out a notice. You know what that notice is, Mr. Farrier?
Yes. They're basically informing the persons down at Shoreline Plaza that they are going to be doing some work on the lights, and just as a safety issue, they would like the area to be cleared. There were some structures there that persons, it might have seemed more permanent than anything else, and so they were asking persons who had grills, who had stuff on the side of the road to just clear the area so that they can perform whatever type of work they had to do there. That's the notice in a nutshell.
Okay. Right. Now, I am a vendor. I am a vendor now. And I am being relocated. And I have a question. Is the location that I am being moved to the best location for me? With respect to accessibility in terms of buyers, and secondly, in terms of the lucrative nature of my business in that particular location. In other words, profitability. And secondly, part B, what are some of the proposed designated areas for vending? Mr. Philip, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, with respect to location, what you alluded to is the mindset of persons, or maybe a vendor, who would think that they would have to be on the doorstep or on the footsteps of persons in order to, get sales and to be profitable. However, that can work another way. As far as, well, the concept that I mentioned earlier, clustering. Let's look at clustering. If I am located on one end of Bastille, you're located on the other end of Bastille, Mr. Henry somewhere in the middle, I'm not sure that we would get the best of the market. But if you put all three of us in the same area, so you start clustering us, to me, you're now creating that environment where persons would know that they're going to find Mr. Henry there, but you're going to have the impulse buying as well from me. And you're going to find that there's greater foot traffic than that which would have passed Mr. Henry in the middle of the town, because they're not coming to you. And so to me, there's a mindset, and there's that mindset of competition, and Mr. Farrier did mention it, in competition with each other. But sometimes we have to start thinking of how we can complement each other. And we know it's a job, but these are the things that we would have to, and that is where our department comes into play. We are providing that level of education, that level of support, so that entrepreneurs understand the whole concept of the marketing and how you reach your clients. If your product or service is at a premium level, your customers will find you. It doesn't matter where, but because we are looking at how we put you all together, you create that cluster, we get the spin-off from each other. We complement each other. And that too may assist with the earlier question you asked. Maybe just physical closeness could trigger that association, that organization that we so well need in the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector. So, trust I would have answered you there.
Right. Now, Mr. Farrier, I spoke about the proposed designated areas. I understand that there has been an area that has already been cleared. Can you speak to that for the relocation of these food trucks, people selling food?
Well, it was an idea posed a few years ago by the Urban Development Unit, who did a lot of work with the entrepreneurs that are operating mobile vending units. It's an area at North Independence Square Street. It can hold all the mobile vending units on the street right now, which is around 5 to 8. And it will have the necessary amenities for them to be comfortable while stationary. These mobile units have the flexibility of moving around, but when they're stationary, I think it creates an atmosphere sometimes of convenience for their patrons. And so that is where this area is going to be trying to emulate, and the enhancements that are going to be put into the area, like bathrooms and hand washing facilities, is going to speak to having an area that is healthy for during COVID protocols, basically.
Right, so you want to have the hand sanitizers, and you want to have water for people to be able to wash their hands and Sometimes too, we can have food poisoning. Sometimes people, they're selling food on the street, but the food is not warm. The food is cold, and basically it is there for a long period of time, and there is not kept warm, and that can create problems, for bacteria and all kinds of things. And sometimes people are selling, and whatever is set up next to the drain and all that sort of a thing, and the type of water that is passing in the drain and all of that. It is certainly not hygienic. It's not very good for people's health. So there are some public health issues. Now we are going to go to the phone lines and to hear what people have to say. The numbers to call are 466-2666, 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. 1-239-645-4500. We await your calls. Okay, so earlier on I had asked about the process. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon. Greetings.
All right, we want to wish everybody there all the best in whatever field, office they're in, because we really need to get ourselves together as a people. It's some animals and some human, Everybody, somebody. We said it earlier, even pin down which is somebody. So, all the best. So, although when we look at the whole thing, it seems to like drama. There's an old adage, prevention is better than cure. And it's better in every which way. So, we say earlier, all right, we had this thing dwindling long time, the street vending, but we know say no good. We know say all the negatives that it brings, although the entrepreneurial positive it shows, we know, we make it go, one said we should nip it in the bud. I said we should never even make it get a bud. Saying, and no, go on. We know it to solve. All right, we have intention of moving the people and setting them. Set the thing and avoid the drama. Set the thing. They are intent. We are people who are dealing with intelligence here. We cannot afford this dispensation, no matter what state of emergency we're in or global pandemic. We cannot afford to be putting cats in front of horses. We have to learn from the past. We are predominant people who must do things correctly. Once again, all the best. Blessed love.
Thank you. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon to all the panelists here on sustainable development. And to Mr. Henry there, always do a good job in the task force. Mr. Williams, I believe that vendors important to us in the Federation. Vendors is very important, but I do not know if government put any vendors on the way to sell. I need to understand vendors went and they get a vendor's license and they go to sell. I don't know if they get license to sell and do it or not. But vendors do a good job, especially food vendors who sell cooked food. I'm agree that the agriculture vendors, like who sell ground food and provision and all those things, I am agree long term for them to stay in the market because the market makes for that. Right? But the vendors who just sell food, I believe that is them cause the problem on their own. Because when a vendor say a vendor there, a vendor gonna come put it in there, an next vendor gonna come put it in there, an next vendor gonna come put it in there, and then they blow this thing out of proportion. and people get confused. People say they can't walk on the sidewalk. It's people in the public complain about the vendors, them, you know. I believe that if they didn't put this thing in place, I believe that we would not get a problem and these things would not happen. But everybody just want to make things political. The country got laws, the country got rules. And by right, we got to go to the rules and the regulation of the country. Look at the bus terminal. Before we got the bus terminal down there, buses used to just come and pick up people and go. There is a confusion, there is a problem. Now everybody, in every bus down there now, they could get the bus full. Go out with the bus full without no confusion. So we must get some kind of rules, we must get some kind of regulation, we must get some kind of laws. And it got to carry out by somehow. But I believe that is the vendors cause these things on themselves. Especially those vendors who were selling junk food. They're not supposed to in the market. But instead of that, they scatter up and down town, up on the sidewalk with people walking, people complaining, especially those who are going up Fourth Street. And I just want the government and the authorities, especially the food vendors, them who sell the cooked food and stuff, to find some place, because these people is a part of the economy, and they help, they got a family to feed. And I just want, but everything got to go by the government and by the people of this country to please the people. All right then, wonderful program.
Thank you. Working for you, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We seem to have lost that caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, that's right.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, and good afternoon to Mr. Henry and the other guy here. Mr. Henry, this is Jam down here. I saw some jam by the square, and I'm going to endorse that. Police during this COVID time must use their discretion and do things. For what I see across the square when I went for my lunch is a shame. We pay police, and police must have respect for citizens. Then there is a problem. The committee dropped the ball. The committee should have come in more to the public and putting things on the radio. They have you, that's why. They have ZZ, they got other medias. Come to the public and aware the public what the committee intends to do and what they want to see done. The next thing I want to touch quickly is that place up in North Independence Square. It can't be in a rush. Up there's a toilet for Bastille. I can't put people who eating food just hurriedly up there. I have to be up there. And that's why I told the Prime Minister one issue to put them on Main Street. And then when I get over there in place and fixed properly, I move them up there. I got to do things. When it's what it's all about. You got banks, we block it off for 14 days every Christmas. We block it off. Put them there. Tell them, look, you got to operate here. That they could make the money. These people got to make the money. These people provide a service for the public. And you all got to, you see, when the problem, you know, and warning the Prime Minister, you know, when you farming committee, you got to put people who born in Bastille and understand what's going on day to day in Bastille. You just can't put anybody on committee. You gotta get people who knows what's going on around. Otherwise you're gonna look stupid, and that is the problem. That's why have a good day. This is Jam here talking.
Okay, Jam down. Thank you for your input. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon.
Yes. About the vendor, I always think about this, you know. Why can't we just have one side of the street for people to walk on, and one side of the street for vendors for now, until you guys find some place to really put the vendors. If when I come home, you know, if there's no vendors on the street them look deserted, man, you know what I mean? You know, it doesn't even look like the same place now, you know? And another thing I could actually suggest, I don't know if it's doable, but on the sidewalk going down from like the market to around the fort, You could make the sidewalk much bigger, extending out. We could have parking and also vendors. Because parking there with parking meters, I know it takes some money, but you got to solve that thing once and for all. We could go from where the sidewalk is now back to the water's edge or a little bit further back, because every town I go in the Caribbean, there's people on the front waterfront selling and doing a little business. But you can make that sidewalk from the which I know beyond the water's edge, go back a little bit. I think that would solve up a lot of problems. Because man could park there with meters, and vendors could always hold on that side of the road also. That's it.
Supportive. Working for you, good afternoon.
Lesroy Williams and Company.
Yes.
The plan to move the food trucks up into the northern, a plot of land to the north of the square, it's not a bad idea. I don't know the square footage of the area, but you did say that one of your members said that the vehicles can fit in there.
Hello?
I'm getting some noises here.
Yes, we're still hearing you.
I hear.
Okay, could you go ahead, please? We seem to have lost that call. The call somehow dropped. Caller, you can call back and voice your concern.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I was saying the plan to put the food trucks up on the northern square, to road across the north of the square, on a plot of land. The question, though, as a follow-up to that, I imagine we might have to, I don't know if you're going to concrete the area, but they're going to put in restroom facilities and that sort of thing, which is a good idea. But what about cleaning facilities on a daily basis so that you don't have build-up of bacteria and a whole heap of garbage building up under these food trucks? That's one thing. Could it also be that that the food arrange that the food trucks do not stay there overnight, such that they to ensure that there's some mobility with these things, and again give the cleaners an opportunity to clean the place thoroughly, so they leave in the evenings and come back in the mornings or something of the sort. And you also have to look at the square. Persons will leave there and go and eat in the square, leaving their styrofoam containers and that kind of thing in the square. So we also have to look at cleanup facilities in the square as well, because we could then have one major mess coming out of North Square Street. But it's something to think about, because we don't want to have trucks put up on blocks there, built up there permanently, and rats and all sorts of other rodents hanging around there, and cups and styrofoam containers and everything underneath these vehicles, really making a mess. So they have to be cleaned daily. Can you give that some consideration? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, greetings again. Yes, I'm the last call, and yeah, you touch it, Yeah, man, they need to go. And listen, moving, the big hullabaloo over moving. As we say, it should never start. We have to do things intelligently. So, in the day, no big thing over the moving. The mobility, as the brethren talk about, be able to move at daytime or move even though that they say it move permanently, ready to move. So, we don't make that be an issue amongst us and separate us to say, them should move, because them don't move and they shouldn't be there in the first place. Mr. Faria, we need to connect with you personally, sir. Can you give us a number publicly? I use a public figure of tell us where to come that we can eyeball and reason with you further.
Okay, he's going to give you a number after. Thank you very much for your call.
Thank you very much for
Right. There were a number of Mr. Faria issues that were raised there. There were some persons who called in and
said that this should have been done sooner rather than now. And the last caller spoke to waste management practices. He spoke to if there's the indiscriminate throwing away or disposal of food, waste and containers. It can lead to other health problems like the harboring of rodents and pests, and even causing diseases and that sort of a thing, which is a public health threat. And I think you had mentioned before about sanitary facilities, putting in water and bathroom facilities which are necessary for people, for cleaning and that sort of a thing. So those are some of the public health measures. You spoke to the COVID-19 protocols that should be observed, especially at this time. And then there were some issues addressed to the police from Mr. Manners. I don't know if you want to answer.
Mr. Manners' suggestion that we use Bank Street as an alternative site for vendors, that used to be a good idea a few years ago, but we recognize now that with the growing number of vehicles that are on our roads, coupled with the fact that quite a number of parking spaces are removed in the areas where the traffic lights are installed, it is now necessary for us to have as much roadway as possible in Bastille so that we could have a smooth flow of traffic. We know Bank Street is the only artery that can get you on the Bay Road easily if you're coming down West Square Street, Bay Road to the right, going towards Ram Supermarket. So if you're coming down West Square Street, if Bank Street is closed, you cannot turn right on the Bay Road at the junction because of the traffic lights in that area. Traffic can only turn left. So if you're going to Rams, coming down West Square Street, you'll be forced to take a left and go up towards the Port Zante roundabout to get back down into Rams. Now that would create its own traffic issues up at that point if we were to force everybody who come down West Square Street to turn left. And so Bank Street is an artery that gets you to the right of the Bay Road from West Square Street. So closing Bank Street cannot be an option at this time. In addition to that, it provides for quite a number of parking spaces. It is a very wide street, and so vehicles can park on both sides and traffic can flow comfortably in both directions because of the width of that road. So it provides for parking and it provides for a smooth flow of traffic in both directions. So to close off that street would create other traffic issues in that area of Bastille, which we would want to avoid at this time. So any measure taken, any place to relocate the vendors would have to be an off-street site. Another caller suggested using one side of the street for pedestrians and the other side for vendors. But that is going to create a problem still because the pedestrian would have to go over on the side where the vendors are, and you're going to still have traffic flowing on that street. So it's still going to pose a health safety risk for pedestrians. And so any solution would have to be an off-road solution. We really cannot afford to take up any of the streets in Bastille permanently for vending purposes at this time.
Mr. Faria, I know that while we are concentrated on the Bastille area, that is part of the problem because then the Bastille area becomes very congested. And what happens is that people from the countryside bring their products into Bastille to be sold, and they all come to the urban area. Are there any plans to decentralize some of these, activities so that the congestion in the Bastille area will be reduced?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Yes, there are. There are plans to establish community markets island-wide. And this is part of the overall plan to deal with vending decentralized vending on a whole that's happening in Bastille. We want the public market to be one of many options. And so you could sell your wares at the public market, but also sell wares within your community. So what the government is now doing is giving persons choices. So they're not pushing people to different areas. You're going to have a view of all the choices. They're going to enhance some of the choices because they have limited resources. And so once you select a choice that's more compatible with your business strategy, you have a choice of going to an area within your community to sell your wares, you can do so. But you first have to probably get registered or seek authorization from the persons that are managing these areas. Most of them are going to be managed by agriculture. So those persons who want to go to the public market to sell vegetables or go in the community, just seek authorization from agriculture. Okay. They will be able to set you up.
Right. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, greetings again. The market situation, I'm glad that the inclusion of the communities, I'm glad for that. So give thanks. Before we go any further though, the officer in the house, Jam Down posed a question to you concerning members of your department. Please address it, sir. Do not bypass it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I really do not see what is there to address. I was at the scene at one point, and we really did not create any scene. There was no physical interaction between the police and the young man. It was all verbal. We would have told him what he needs to do. Of course, he didn't thought that he should comply, and so he would have aired his views on the issue. We listened to him, and we gave him time. He was allowed to continue for the rest of that day and to cease by the following day, and he really complied. And so I really did not see an issue that was so out of order in that video that Jamdon is speaking about.
Okay. While we do have a call. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Roy.
Yes.
You continue to do a wonderful job.
Thank you.
And I want to encourage those in the panel to remember the times that we're living in. Mankind no longer have proper regards for each other. And I have been looking at the life of Superintendent Henry for the past years. And he continued to do a marvelous job as a police officer. But I would like Jam Down and anyone else who trying to address him on the radio to deal with this situation a little more polite. Because I home here listening, trying to understand what Jam Down concerns were, and I couldn't understand. And now I'm hearing someone else asking for explanation, and to me there's nobody in the police force can come on radio and explain themselves as clearly as Brother Henry. But I want the people in St. Kitts and Nevis to understand we are living in what the Bible makes reference to as the pangs of distress because of the circumstances and the situation of life that we're faced with today. We don't even want to respect each other, so we have to watch that. We got to comply with what the police is saying. We cannot disrespect the police. And I feel good that before this program over, I heard Henry talk about whatever happened. It was just verbal. But I thought it was something else, a roughing up and a throwing the van and something else. We got to be so careful how we're trying to put over things. Now, when I speak on the radio, I doesn't have no concern what people think about me, because nobody can run me from here. But let me say this before I go. The young man, you said there's a young fiery gentleman there. He was so clear in his explanation. There's another gentleman there, you say, I think from Commerce or some affairs. He was so good in his explanation. Henry always going to be good. What we need It's corporation. The law has its work to do. We as citizens have to comply. Otherwise, we'll be chaotic. We'll have chaos. You all have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Right. Working for you, good afternoon.
Again, Mr. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, Mr. Leader, I didn't hear nobody I was looking for some feedback on the mention about the sidewalk, the being built further out into the sea. No, you know, think it is so small. We have yellow lines all over the place, you know, and we have grown tremendously in populations from the time I was small. We have more cars, we have more everything. You know, it's like, you know, those people who on the street, they're really going to go. You know, and that's, to me, that's one of the only solutions, I mean, that we could have is by, you know, making that area for people to do their businesses. You know, but I didn't get any feedback on that at all. So I want to know if that is doable.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. We call what Jamdom said and what we call for the police to address. And we wasn't there. We saw some things going on video. We didn't see nothing excessive. At Jamdom, we like Jamdom to come again and make us know what he's talking about. Because I'm very concerned about police excessive. And I didn't hear this the first time I'm hearing it.
Thank you
I
very
didn't
much.
want the police to bypass it. Because this is a very important issue.
Yes, thank you. We don't want to be belaboring that. We're spinning top in mud. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir, and everybody there. You hear me?
Yes.
Hello? You hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay. Look, this is directed to Inspector Henry. Inspector Henry, there's a road that is hardly being used by traffic. You know where Dilly Warren is? It's a short road about 74 yards long from Liverpool that goes into where at one point I think Charles Brisbane had a business in a building right there. That's where Master Kane's shop used to be. You know what I'm talking about?
From Liverpool Road to Princess Street, yes.
A short little road between there. Hardly any traffic is done there. Instead of having all these food people, is it not possible to put some people in the short road there? Because that is hardly being used, you know. Remember there was a time when the whole road had blocked off for some months because they were doing some renovation on, I think, on Dilly Waldwin. You know Dilly Road I'm talking about?
Dilly Road, yes. Dilly Street.
Yes, Dilly Street, yeah. Maybe something will go between there because there's hardly any traffic, any traffic going up there. People may use it for parking space. You can only park on one space, but maybe that's another place that could be considered. You understand what I mean? Hello?
Yeah, I hear you, yes.
Yes, it's a short street there. It's hardly being used by anybody going up or down. Maybe that could be considered as another venue. Just a thought, eh?
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Farrier, one of the things is that we cannot be having small talk and belaboring certain things over and over again. This show is not for that. Mr. Farrier, what were some of the general recommendations coming out of the Interministerial Committee?
Some of the general recommendations coming out of the committee for now, the main recommendation was that persons seek authorization from the relevant authorities. That was the main recommendation. Also, that vending take place in areas that were safe, healthy, and had some sort of structure behind it. Because now you would have a management structure and cater to both vendors and the users' needs. Also, we wanted to have more inter-ministerial collaboration when dealing with vending. Because vending transcends a lot of the other ministries, and so we collaborate when you're dealing with vending. It can only help the vendors. We wanted to use the market. We recommended using the market more. At the time, the market was pretty empty. And we are aware that the market is not perfect. But as you can see, the market is a very versatile place. It's pretty much right now acting as a transitional area for vendors. So when persons are given choices as to where they want to go, maybe they want to set up in a community, they can transition from the market right now to those areas. Another, some of the legislative issues are fixing some of the legislation dealing with vending to make it a lot more agile with modern times. These legislations were done back in the 90s, some in the early 2000s. And so you wanted to address what's happening today. And one of the more important recommendations is making sure that somebody checks on the vendors, find out if they're satisfied with the area. Constant dialogue between vendors, between users, vendor satisfaction. We always do user satisfaction, but nobody checks on vendor satisfaction. Also, having regular forums where you speak about vending and try to inform persons that it's not just about you. Your actions can impact others. Vendors are not the only stakeholders in Bastille. Please be aware of the pedestrians, people with disabilities, formal traders. So that was it basically in a nutshell. With the public health recommendations, better waste management. The representatives from public health were very adamant about cooked food, and it should occur in appropriate locations. It's not everywhere it's not in every place you should be handing food, especially near to drains or on the sidewalks where it's dirty. Food is a very touchy issue, and therefore they were very sensitive about the public health and very protective of the public health, basically. So they didn't want food being done in any and anywhere. Also, they were concerned about waste management of the drains in terms of making sure that the drains are constantly disinfected and trying to eradicate a lot of the rodents that have now occurred because of improper waste disposal. People dumping stuff in the roads, especially from the food vendors. Basically, those were recommendations that could be implemented sooner rather than later.
Okay. Now, Mr. Brown, the Small Business Development Center is to offer support to small businesses. The vendors are considered somehow a micro business, micro to small, micro business. What type of support can you say that the Small Business Development Center can offer to vendors going forward?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, these vendors, they're entrepreneurs, and as they are faced with maybe a transitional period, some of these persons would now need to be looking at their marketing strategies, product development, enhancing what they do, maybe sourcing additional financing to move into the new areas and, adapt and succeed in what we are now looking at as the new business norm. There's a new business climate, and so what we do is to provide that type of support, that hand-holding support, your business plans, helping you navigate laws and import duty concessions and all that kind of stuff, so that you can in fact operate a successful small business. And it's important for our entrepreneurs or vendors to understand that a business is a business. And in the very same way that some of the larger ones would have to pay attention to their record keeping and all the other things that they do, it is very much so. You as the entrepreneur, the small business person, would have to do similar things if you're going to succeed. In terms of additional support, we are, and hence I guess our insertion on this panel, but we are in constant contact and engagement with Mr. Farrier and his committee, well, via Mr. Farrier, because we are as we speak, looking at support systems like incubation, that support system where you can place an entrepreneur in, whether it's brick and mortar or sometimes it's virtual, have them, develop and graduate to the point where they can now, go out into the larger community and, apply their trade. And then we pull someone else in again. So you have a sort of revolving system where persons can get support by way of training, business management assistance, etc. So it is in fact our aim to ensure that we don't stop. This is a process that is ongoing, because the integration of some of these persons who we see as being in the informal sector into that formal sector, into that sector where they can benefit from government assistance, is one of our major goals. Of course, also ensuring that they can be successful. They can improve the living standards for themselves and their families. So we are, in fact, functioning as that conduit, that we can help you with some of the legwork in terms of how we engage Mr. Farrier and his team and the committee to provide the best possible accommodation for our vendors and our entrepreneurs.
Okay, right. Superintendent, what is the way forward in terms of the law and what the law speaks to in terms of vending, street vendors, in terms of the authorization for them getting their licenses, renewing their licenses when they should be renewed, inspections, and all of that?
Well, as Mr. Farrier indicated, that one of their recommendations was the need to modernize legislation with respect to vending and vendors. And so this would require having a licensing authority for vending. Currently, I do not think there is such an authority. So, some act speaks to applying to permission from the Minister of Finance. The Commissioner of Police, or the licensing authority for traffic, is responsible for streets and sidewalks, and so any obstruction of those streets or sidewalks must be with the permission of the Commissioner of Police. And so if a person wants to vend on a sidewalk, as we permit from time to time, there are persons who would have fundraisers, we would allow them to set up their breakfast sale in the circus or in certain areas where they would not present a hazard to traffic, to pedestrian traffic. We would allow that. So there's some discretion for those type of vending, and I think I see those as temporary vending. If you have a bake sale or a breakfast sale once a week for a couple of hours, these are things that the Commissioner of Police can permit. But in terms of long-term vending on a permanent basis, they need to be set up they need to be established some authority that would regulate, license and regulate this activity. Yeah, and so that would form part of the
St. Christopher Tourism Authority Licenses of Vendors Act.
Right. What those
speaks to vendors to be licensed in or on any street, sidewalk, park, beach, or area of water adjacent to a beach or in any other public area.
Right. So maybe we could look at that, but that licensing authority mainly deals with vendors
in the tourism
in the
industry.
tourism industry.
Yeah, but
So-
everything
so-
can be seen as that of tourism,
Right.
really.
And so-
because the tourists are not just out on the beaches, they're also in town, and you can be selling your craft in the cotton industry, your little souvenirs and all of that on the street as well. That is a part of tourism too.
That only governs certain areas.
Oh.
So within the act,
There is a
no, on the act itself, there's a schedule that
Yes.
speaks to their jurisdiction. So it's
Also, this is
Black
only
Rocks
certain prescribed areas.
yes.
Okay.
And that's why the committee wanted to recommend vending in either prescribed areas or designated areas.
Okay.
Because what we found, just to mitigate against the chaos, once you have a management team in place, you can basically hear vendor issues, you can solve conflicts along the way with a proper management team in place, because it has been proven. It has been proven in these prescribed areas. So that's why we had the member from tourism on the committee, because they have experience. This is Tourism Authority, but tourism manages Ferry Terminal, Amino Craft Market. And so they were able to say, you need a governance structure in place, and it kind of works to the benefit of the vendors.
I think we have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon. That caller is gone. Right. I think we are out of time. Is there anything that you want to say before we leave? Mr. Farrier?
Well, basically, I just want to bring a final point across. Street vending is not bad. It's actually, most people enjoy it, but it has to be organized. And what we found in doing our work, which is not done, it is far from done. What we found is that this issue is bigger than vending. The safety issue, the health issue, and people's disregard for the law started trumping actual vending issues. And so we felt as a committee that a lot of this would be solved if people start channeling their questions towards the necessary authorities. As in Superintendent Henry said, Commissioner of Police, Ministry of Finance, different civil servants, Mr. Brown, myself, start asking questions. Start seeking authorization, we'll put you on to whoever, start seeking certification. And that in itself will bring some sort of organization to vending. Because it can only thrive in a more organized environment, especially these incubator environments that we are planning to create.
Mr. Brown?
I just want to close by, encouraging our entrepreneurs and our vendors to embrace this moment. We are at this juncture for a particular reason. And of course, we know that the work is not done until we have properly relocated persons, we have created a satisfactory environment, one in which they can thrive, etc., etc. And I would want persons and vendors to be assured that the government is throwing all of the necessary resources behind this particular venture to ensure that we are in fact looking out and enhancing the standard of living of our citizens, and of course developing a business sector, the micro, small and medium enterprise sector. We continue to encourage collaboration via associations and the development of organizations. We think in that type of unity there is strength and there is much representation for the sector in itself. We would want to encourage persons to reach us at, you can send us an email at sbdc@gov.kn. You can reach us on Facebook, Small Business Development Center, SBDC St. Kitts, and you can WhatsApp us, WhatsApp only on 869-669-3358 or 869-661-7648. Let's talk, let's have a conversation, let's work towards the development of our nation.
Superintendent.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Williams. Now, I started by highlighting the rights of the vendors to earn a living and the rights of the public collectively to use public space. And I think what we have concluded is that both have to coexist. The public have to be able to use the sidewalks freely, and the vendors have to be able to earn their living within a safe and regulated environment. And so that is where we are heading. We have identified space, and we are going to put processes in place so that persons to utilize those space that has been identified for vendors can do so by some process, an application or registration process, and with that assignment of space, there will be some responsibility, both on the side of the government to provide maybe running water, to provide electricity, but you now have to provide the other things that would keep the public safe, ensure your space is kept clean, ensure that you do all the things that will be required of you when those processes are put in place. And so we want to ask the vendors to bear with us. It is not a fight us against you. We are trying to protect your interests, and we are trying to protect the general public's interests at the same time by regulating the whole industry of that you are chosen to earn your living. And so we're just seeking your cooperation in this regard.
Okay, I want to thank all three of you. We had Superintendent Cromwell Henry of the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force, Mr. Philip Brown, who is Director of the Small Business Development Center within the Ministry of Trade, and Mr. Austin J. Farrier, who is a Senior Planner in the Department of Planning, but he is also the Chair of the Interministerial Committee to deal with street vending in Bastia. Thank you to all three of you for coming today and sharing on such an important topic, an important issue, which we want as a win-win situation, a situation where everybody can benefit. Thank you to all of our callers to today's program, and thanks to all our listeners to today's program. We continue to appreciate you. Next week we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams.